What is up? Welcome back to another video. Today we're going to be reacting to how long would it take Patrick Jane to catch Dexter? The Mentalist to catch Dexter. I don't know. This dude's super smart. Let's just watch the video, see how it goes, bro. We'll see how he would do it.
What would happen if Patrick Jane, the fake psychic turned genius consultant from The Mentalist, ever crossed paths with Dexter Morgan? On paper, these two guys couldn't be more different. One of them solves murders using nothing but body language and psychological tricks. The other one commits murders using nothing but discipline and a set of rules his dead father drilled into him. But if you actually could put them in the same room, in my opinion, this becomes one of the most fascinating hypothetical showdowns you could ever
Dexter
build.
knows how to hide
both
it.
of these guys are basically playing the same game from opposite sides of the
Yeah, Dexter knows how to hide it. He knows how to find it, but they're both really good at what they do, so I don't know how that would go.
Now let's start with Jane, because understanding what makes him dangerous is the whole key to this theory. Before he became a consultant for the CBI, Jane spent years working as a fake psychic, running cold reading scams on grieving families and gullible audiences. That backstory matters a lot, because it means his entire skill set is built on reading people, not on forensics or paperwork. After his wife and daughter were murdered by the serial killer Red John, Jane dropped the psychic act completely and started using those manipulation skills for actual justice. His whole method relies on catching micro expressions, the tiny facial movements that last less than a second and reveal what someone is really feeling underneath. He also picks up on vocal tone shifts, awkward pauses, and word choices that
So he's pretty much going to figure it out instantly, and it's not going to matter. Maybe, but I know he's like, I don't know. Maybe he's just that good at reading people. I really don't know.
most people would never even notice. On top of that, Jane isn't afraid to bend the rules during interrogations, using suggestion techniques that get uncomfortably close to hypnosis. The thing that makes him different from basically every other TV detective is that he forms his conclusion about someone's guilt first, based purely on how they react to him, and then he goes looking for the evidence to back it up afterward. That's backwards from how real investigations are supposed to work, but it's terrifyingly effective when the person doing it is actually right. Now let's flip over to Dexter, because his advantages are just as specific, even though they work in completely different ways. Dexter works as a blood spatter analyst for Miami Homicide, which already puts him in a strange position, since he's technically part of the system that would be hunting him if anyone ever figured out the truth. Underneath that job, he's the Bay Harbor Butcher, a serial killer who only targets other killers who slip through the justice system. His adoptive father, Harry, built an entire code around this, and the code has one rule that matters more than any other, which is don't get caught. Dexter was trained from childhood to control his urges, but here's the part that makes him such a unique target for someone like Jane though. Dexter isn't a normal criminal trying to hide guilt through good acting. He doesn't process emotions the way everyone else does. So when Jane goes fishing for those tiny emotional slips he usually finds in people, Dexter might not have them to give in the first place. And that's exactly where things get interesting. So let's set up how this crossover would even happen. Say Miami Metro pulls in an outside consultant for a case that crosses state lines.
So you think he would be so blank that he couldn't figure it out? But then they'd be working together too, because they're like, I don't know.
Too big or too weird for the local department to handle alone. That consultant is Jane, and now he's walking through the halls of Miami Metro, observing everyone before he even knows who's who. Jane doesn't start by suspecting Dexter specifically. Instead, he reads the entire room first, the awkward tension between certain coworkers, who's trying too hard to be helpful. Dexter would fit into the background pretty easily at first. He comes across as friendly enough, holds a normal conversation, and blends into the department culture without drawing much attention. Sure, he might come off as a little awkward, but plenty of forensic guys are a little awkward, so that alone wouldn't raise any flags. The real problem starts the moment Jane decides to actually talk to Dexter directly, because that's when Jane's whole method kicks into gear. Now, here's the thing about Jane that makes him so dangerous to someone like Dexter. He doesn't walk up and interrogate people outright. He starts casual conversations that feel completely normal on the surface, but he's quietly testing the person the entire time, without them realizing it's happening. He might provoke a little bit, or use a light version of that suggestion technique he's known for, just to see how someone reacts under pressure they don't know they're under. Against the normal person, this works almost every time, because normal people leak little cracks in their composure without meaning to, but Dexter isn't a normal person, and that's exactly where things get weird for Jane. Instead of leaking those small emotional cracks, Dexter just doesn't respond the way a typical suspect would. He doesn't show the nervous tells Jane is trained to look for. And here's the twist that I think makes this whole matchup so compelling: the complete absence of of a reaction is itself a reaction. Jane has spent his entire career reading the gaps between what people say and what their bodies give away, so a person who has literally no gap at all would stand out to him as something unnatural, almost like static on a signal that's supposed to be clear. Now, once Jane clocks that something is off about Dexter, his instincts would push him toward digging into old cases instead of just watching present behavior, and in my opinion, this is exactly where the Bay Harbor Butcher case becomes impossible for him to ignore. That investigation was one of the biggest homicide cases in Miami's history, with dozens of dismembered victims found wrapped in plastic and dumped into the ocean. The task force built a detailed profile of the killer, describing someone meticulous, forensically trained, and clearly connected to law enforcement resources. But the case got closed abruptly, with all the blame dumped onto Sergeant James Dokes, a man who happened to be in the wrong place at the worst possible time. Jane has a track record of sniffing out cases that got wrapped up too cleanly and too quickly, and he doesn't respect the idea that a closed case is automatically a solved case. If he pulled the old files, he'd see the same gaps that a sharp investigator would notice: missing pieces of the timeline, questions that stopped getting asked, and a convenient suspect who's happened to be dead before he could defend himself. Jane wouldn't need long to start connecting Dexter's unnatural composure to a killer who was trained specifically to protect
I did not mean to do that. So
normalcy under pressure.
pretty much he's gonna figure it out instantly because he has no emotion. But if he had a normal one, he just doesn't have normal emotion. I don't know how. I guess he would just tell.
Sure.
He's
now,
him.
here's where
The
I think
Mentalist is
a
him.
lot of people would get this matchup wrong, because knowing something and proving something are two completely different battles. Jane might reach the correct conclusion in his head fairly quickly, maybe within a couple weeks of paying close attention, but actually building a case that would hold up against Dexter is a whole different fight, because Dexter isn't just some lucky criminal who's avoided getting caught. He was trained from childhood around one single rule, and that rule is don't get caught. Harry's Code is essentially a survival manual built by a cop who spent decades watching criminals repeat the same predictable mistakes. Dexter understands exactly how homicide investigations work because he actively participates in them every single day at his job. He knows the chain of custody procedures, the evidence protocols, and the legal timelines investigators have to work within. Most importantly, he knows exactly what detectives look for, because he's the guy who helps detectives find those things in other people's cases. Now, against a normal detective following normal procedure, that knowledge gives Dexter an enormous advantage. But Jane isn't playing by normal procedure either, and that's what makes this such an even fight. Now, what makes Jane actually dangerous in this scenario is that he doesn't need evidence to be personally convinced of something. He forms psychological certainty first, and once that certainty locks in, he becomes relentless about proving it by any means necessary, even methods that technically cross legal lines. This creates
So even if he's gonna know, he may know, but he's not gonna be able to catch him for a while until he sees him slip up.
It's a really tense dynamic where both men would essentially be studying each other from a distance for a while, each one aware that something isn't right, but neither one is making a move yet. That kind of standoff never lasts forever though, especially not with someone like Dexter involved, because eventually the pressure builds to a point where somebody has to act, and that brings up a genuinely dangerous problem for Jane specifically. If Jane got too close to the truth, Dexter wouldn't just sit around waiting to get arrested. Jane fits into a category of person Dexter has dealt with before, someone getting dangerously close to exposing him, and Dexter has never had a problem crossing his own code's boundaries when his freedom is directly on the line. People might argue that Dexter only kills other killers, and that's technically true, but the code has always had that one flexible exception built into it, the part about never getting caught.
Yeah, he absolutely cannot get caught. Even though he knows he's gonna do something sketchy.
Dexter has proven plenty of times that he'll break his own rules the moment his back is against the wall. And here's where the things get risky for Jane though, because his entire skill set lives in his head, not in his hands. Jane is a master of reading people and manipulating conversations, but he's never been built for physical confrontation. If it ever came down to a direct physical situation, Jane would be at serious disadvantage against someone who has spent years learning how to subdue people quickly and quietly. So realistically, if Dexter ever got Jane alone in a controlled setting, that encounter would probably not end well for Jane. That's exactly why Jane's whole strategy would have to revolve around never letting things get that far in the first place, using distance, misdirection, and other people as a buffer instead of ever confronting Dexter alone. So let's get into the part I think would be the most interesting to watch play out, which is how Jane would actually try to catch Dexter without ever putting himself in physical danger. Knowing Jane's style from the show, I think the smartest move would be go going after the old Bay Harbor Butcher case directly, since that trail is already cold and picked apart. Instead, Jane would try to create a situation that forces Dexter to reveal himself in the present. He'd start by quietly identifying a criminal who's still walking free because of some technicality or system failure. Then, without ever mentioning it to Dexter directly, Jane would make sure information about this person casually crosses Dexter's path at work, maybe through a case file left visible a little too long, or a conversation happening just within earshot. Jane wouldn't force it. He'd let curiosity and instinct do the heavy lifting, because he understands something important about people like Dexter. A trained killer following a strict code isn't going to resist a perfect target dropped right in front of him, especially one that seems to have fallen through the cracks of the system Dexter already distrusts. Once that bait is out there, Jane's real move would be surveillance, not confrontation. He'd quietly arrange for the target's location to be watched without raising any suspicion, treating the entire setup like protective surveillance rather than a trap aimed at Dexter specifically. This is smart on Jane's part because it keeps him completely insulated. If nothing happens, nobody ever knows the trap existed at all, but if Dexter takes the bait and moves on that target, Jane wouldn't be trying to catch him in the act of killing, because that's messy and dangerous. Instead, he'd be building a pattern of evidence around Dexter's behavior leading up to that moment. Jane's whole goal wouldn't be proving Dexter committed murders from years ago. It would be proving that Dexter is still actively dangerous right now, because present tense evidence is infinitely easier to build a case around than an ocean full of decade-old bones. So realistically, I don't think this cat and mouse game would resolve quickly, and honestly, that's what makes it such a compelling standoff in the first place. Jane has an almost supernatural talent for figuring out the truth about people. Dexter has an almost supernatural talent for staying invisible while doing horrible things. Put those two abilities against each other and you get a slow burn instead of a quick knockout. My honest guess is that Jane would land on the correct suspicion within the first couple of weeks just from reading Dexter's behavior alone, but actually building something solid enough to move on, especially against someone this careful, would probably take a couple months at minimum. And during all of that time, Dexter would be doing exactly what he's always done best, watching and adapting and trying to figure out exactly how much Jane actually knows before deciding whether he needs to become a problem that gets permanently solved. So bringing all of this together, in my opinion, Jane wins the psychological battle almost every single time, because that's simply the game he was built for. And Dexter's biggest weakness has always been that his perfect mask is itself unnatural enough to be spotted by someone paying close enough attention. But winning the psychological battle and winning outright are two very different outcomes. If this whole situation ever tipped into physical danger territory, Jane would be in serious trouble, because brain power alone doesn't protect you from someone trained specifically to handle physical threats, quietly and efficiently, remember. So realistically, Jane's only real path to victory is staying several steps ahead the entire time, and never letting Dexter get him alone in a vulnerable position. If I had to put a number on it, I'd guess Jane figures out the truth within about 2 weeks, but actually building a case strong enough to bring Dexter down safely would take somewhere around 2 to 3 months, assuming absolutely nothing goes wrong along the way. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, because there's a lot more of these crossover theories coming soon.
Only 2 to 3 months though? I think it'd be longer than that to actually get him. You think? Because Dexter, bro, there's something about him, bro.
Are you tired?
He's something else. And if he gets in the mentalist likes putting himself in this situation. So how is he gonna catch him if he wants to be in the situation so bad? Maybe he's smart enough to stay out of it. I don't know. I mean, maybe 3 months? Do we think? I guess let me know in the comments how long you think it would really take for Dexter to be caught. Because I don't think it would be months. I think it would take at least a year, bro. He'd have to get like hard evidence, even though he knew. I don't know. Well, hopefully y'all did enjoy. If you did, don't forget to subscribe, like, comment for more reaction videos on the Bread XP channel. This is the man, and don't forget, in the description is the link to the gaming channel if you do mess with gaming content. I'll see you in the next one.